Ethan Miller had always been careful. Careful with his words, careful with his heart, careful with whom he trusted. But tonight, stranded on a winding forest road in New England, all of that carefulness seemed useless. His car had coughed, groaned, and finally surrendered just as the sun dipped behind the tall pines, leaving him in a dimming, almost eerie light. The engine refused to start again, and the phone in his pocket displayed the merciless words, "No service." Panic fluttered briefly in his chest before he shoved it down, trying to remember the calm, methodical side of himself he usually relied on. The forest pressed in around him, dark and silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. He had thought this trip would help him clear his mind after his breakup, but instead, it felt like he'd driven himself into a trap. Each shadow seemed to hold a question he wasn't ready to answer. Each gust of wind a reminder of how alone he really was. He walked around the car, jiggled the doors, checked under the hood again, and cursed under his breath. Nothing worked. That's when the headlights appeared. At first, he thought it was a trick of the fading light, a reflection of the moon on the road. Then the car slowed, an old sedan with a muted yellow glow coming from the dashboard, and pulled up beside him. The driver rolled down the window, and Ethan was met with a warm, confident smile. The man behind the wheel looked to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell casually over his forehead and eyes that seemed to observe everything, yet nothing at all. "You need a lift?" the man asked, his voice calm and strangely reassuring. Ethan hesitated. Stranger danger, instinct screaming, yet the safety of a warm car was too tempting. "I think so," he said, sliding the door open. The smell of leather and faint coffee hit him immediately, oddly comforting. "I'm Jason," the driver said, extending a hand. Ethan shook it, feeling the firm warmth of his grip. "You're lucky I was passing by. Not many people out here this late." Ethan swallowed and nodded. "Ethan, thanks. I'm kind of stuck." The car merged back onto the road, engine humming smoothly. Silence settled for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Jason had a way of making it feel natural, like he was listening even when he wasn't speaking. Ethan found himself studying him without intending to. The gentle arch of his brow, the way his lips curved when he smiled slightly, the relaxed confidence in the way he handled the wheel. It made Ethan's chest tighten, a mix of curiosity and something he didn't want to name. They drove past dense trees, the road narrowing as shadows lengthened. Ethan tried small talk about the weather, the forest, New England roads, but Jason's responses were measured, occasionally teasing, often making him laugh in a way he hadn't in months. Ethan felt a strange pull toward him, a comfort that was alien and exhilarating at the same time. Then, Jason slowed the car. "There's a shortcut through here," he said, gesturing toward a smaller dirt road veering off into the forest. "I promise it'll get us back on track faster." Ethan's stomach twisted with a mix of anxiety and something else he couldn't name. The road was darker, narrower, lined with trees that seemed to lean in closer. "Are you sure?" he asked, trying to mask the nervous edge in his voice. That Jason's smile was calm, almost mischievous. "Trust me," he said simply. Ethan nodded, sitting back, and tried to trust him. The hum of the engine, the occasional flicker of moonlight through the trees, and Jason's steady presence created a strange bubble of safety. And yet, there was tension, an invisible thread connecting them that Ethan couldn't ignore, tugging at the corners of his careful, controlled world. As they continued down the winding path, Ethan's mind raced with questions he didn't dare voice aloud. Who was this man really? Why had he stopped for him? And, most disturbingly, why did he feel his chest tighten every time Jason looked at him just a little too knowingly? By the time they reached a small clearing where the moonlight spilled across the road, Ethan realized he was both terrified and exhilarated. The forest felt alive, the night full of possibilities he hadn't considered in years. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what might happen next, and against all his instincts, he was eager to find out. The shortcut wound deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around the narrow dirt road like silent sentinels. Ethan's pulse quickened with every turn, the isolation pressing against him in a way that was both frightening and strangely thrilling. Jason's hands remained steady on the wheel, his calm presence almost hypnotic. Ethan found himself stealing glances at him, noting the slight curve of his jaw, the way his eyes caught the moonlight, and the ease with which he seemed to navigate the road as if he had been born to it. "You drive through here often?" Ethan asked, trying to fill the silence, but also secretly wanting to hear more about Jason. "Sometimes," Jason replied, his voice low, casual, almost teasing. "I like roads that aren't crowded. Gives me a chance to think, or talk to interesting people I meet along the way." He glanced at Ethan and smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made Ethan's stomach flutter. The conversation eased into something softer, more personal. Jason spoke about his life in small, careful doses, his love for photography, how he had moved to New England after years in the city, his own battles with loneliness. Ethan felt a strange kinship, a resonance he hadn't expected. He found himself sharing fragments of his own story, carefully selected truths that he hadn't told anyone in months. His breakup, the isolation of his apartment, the secret desires he hadn't allowed himself to explore. Jason listened with an intensity that was almost unsettling, leaning in slightly when Ethan spoke, nodding, offering small, encouraging smiles. Each gesture, each look seemed loaded with meaning, though nothing was said aloud. Ethan felt a pull he couldn't quite name, a tension that tightened around his chest, warming and urgent, like T1 particularly dark stretch of road. Jason slowed the car even further. "Want to see something?" he asked, his voice gentled. Ethan's heart skipped. "What?" Jason didn't answer immediately. Instead, he guided the car off the dirt road and into a small clearing where the moonlight spilled over a quiet, grassy knoll. The forest was silent here, almost reverent, the air cool and crisp. Jason cut the engine, leaving them in the soft glow of moonlight and the quiet hum of the forest. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jason said, stepping out of the car. Ethan followed, his feet crunching on the soft dirt. The air smelled of pine and earth, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, fragile and intimate. They stood side by side, close enough that their shoulders brushed, and Ethan's chest thumped in a way that made him acutely aware of his own body. He wanted to step back, to maintain some kind of careful distance, but a part of him didn't. Jason had a way of making boundaries feel porous, of turning the simplest moments into charged spaces. "You're different than I expected," Jason said after a pause, his eyes meeting Ethan's. There was a softness there, an unspoken question, as if he were reading the thoughts Ethan had tried to hide. Ethan swallowed, feeling the weight of that look, the pull of something dangerous and exhilarating. "Different how?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Jason shrugged, casual but deliberate. "I don't know. Open, honest, nervous, but not afraid to feel. Not everyone is like that." His gaze lingered, and Ethan felt the warmth of it in his chest, a strange combination of comfort and heat that made his pulse hammer in his ears. The silence stretched, filled with everything that wasn't being said. Ethan felt an ache of longing, a stir of desire he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. The forest seemed to hold its breath with him, the world narrowing to the small space between him and Jason. Then Jason stepped a little closer, just enough that Ethan could feel the faint heat of his body. "You don't have to go back to being alone tonight," he said softly. There was no pressure, just an offering, and it left Ethan's mind spinning that Ethan's heart raced. He knew the path ahead was complicated, tangled with past hurts and societal expectations. Yet he also knew that the feeling of connection, of being seen and understood, was rare, maybe rarer than he had ever allowed himself to admit. He looked up at Jason, searching his face for answers, for reassurance, for a hint of what might come next. And in that look, he saw something familiar reflected back at him. Desire, curiosity, and perhaps a chance at something he hadn't thought possible for himself. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the night stretching on, full of quiet promise and uncertain possibilities. Ethan knew one thing with absolute clarity. This encounter, brief and unexpected as it was, would change him. Whether for better or worse, he didn't yet know. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to walk away. That Ethan's chest tightened as he stood there, the forest around them silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Jason's presence was magnetic, calm, yet insistent in a way that made the air between them electric. The world beyond the clearing, past the trees, the winding roads, the quiet fears, felt distant, irrelevant. In that moment, all that mattered was the space they shared and the unspoken understanding that had grown between them in just a few short hours. Jason stepped a little closer, close enough that Ethan could feel the warmth radiating off him. He wasn't pushing, not exactly, but there was an invitation in the way he looked at Ethan, an encouragement to let go, to feel, to allow the night to sweep away the carefulness Ethan had clung to for so long. Ethan's pulse raced, the tight knot of fear and anticipation in his chest loosening just enough for desire to take root. "You're different," Jason said softly, his voice low, almost a whisper carried by the night air. "And I like that. You don't hide everything. You feel, and it's refreshing." Ethan swallowed hard, caught between the pull of temptation and the remnants of caution. I'm not used to this," he admitted, his voice barely above a murmur. "Not like this." Jason tilted his head, eyes warm but probing. "Like what?" "Feeling seen," Ethan confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush he hadn't planned. "Really seen. By someone whom I want something more than just a moment." He trailed off, the confession tasting strange and thrilling on his tongue. Jason smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made Ethan's heart stutter. "I get it," he said. "And maybe I want more too. Maybe more than just tonight." His hand brushed against Ethan's, accidental, or perhaps deliberate, and the contact sent a jolt through him that he couldn't ignore. They stood there, close, letting the quiet stretch between them. Ethan's mind raced with all the reasons he shouldn't, all the doubts and fears he carried. And yet, none of that mattered in the face of this connection, raw and immediate. There was an intimacy here that went beyond the fleeting, a sense of being understood, of being desired, and of being alive in a way he hadn't been in years. Jason leaned back slightly, giving Ethan space but keeping his presence felt. "We don't have to rush," he said softly. "Just feel it. This moment. No labels, no expectations. Just us." Ethan nodded, exhaling slowly, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease for the first time in weeks. He had spent so long guarding his heart, so long hiding parts of himself that he thought were unacceptable, that he had forgotten how it felt to trust, to desire, to surrender, even just a little. And now, in the quiet of the forest, with the moonlight brushing their faces, he felt it again. The thrill of being wanted, of being seen, of being more than he allowed himself to be. Eventually, Jason started the car again, the soft rumble of the engine filling the silence. Ethan slid into the seat beside him, the tension replaced by a quiet anticipation. They didn't speak much, letting the rhythm of the drive, the hum of the engine, and the occasional glance exchanged between them carry the conversation. Every look, every brush of hands, every shared breath spoke volumes that words could not capture. When the forest finally thinned and the lights of a nearby town appeared, Ethan felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. The journey was ending. The encounter had been fleeting, but its impact would linger far longer than the miles they had traveled together. Jason parked the car, turning to him with that same calm, inviting smile. "You made it," Jason said simply, though the meaning behind it stretched deeper than the words. Ethan nodded, his own smile tentative but genuine. "Thanks for everything," he said, his voice tinged with gratitude and something unspoken. A hope that this wasn't truly the end. Jason's hand brushed his shoulder lightly in farewell, a gesture that carried warmth, promise, and the memory of what had passed between them. "Maybe we'll meet again," he said softly, though there was no pressure, only possibility. As Ethan stepped out of the car and watched Jason drive away, he felt a strange mixture of longing and liberation. The forest had tested him, challenged him, and left him changed. He had trusted a stranger, allowed himself to feel desire, and in doing so had discovered a side of himself he had long kept hidden. Walking into the town under the glow of streetlights, Ethan felt alive. His past heartbreak and the weight of secrecy were still there, but now tempered with a spark of courage and a newfound awareness of his desires. For the first time in a long while, he understood that connection, even fleeting, could be transformative, and that sometimes letting go was exactly what one needed to find themselves again.